What's up, YouTube? We are getting into Nehemiah chapter 4. If you haven't, please go back and watch 1, 2, and 3 because this may not make sense to you. I do want to let you guys know that I'm reading from the CSB version, so don't be alarmed if you're following with KJV or NIV and some of it just doesn't quite synchronize with what you got going on. So just bear with me and let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 4 verse 1 says, "When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became furious. He mocked the Jews before his colleagues and the powerful men of Samaria and said, 'What are these pathetic Jews doing? Can they restore it by themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they ever finish it? Can they bring these burnt stones back to life from the mounds of rubble?' Then Tobiah the Ammonite, who was beside him, said, 'Indeed, even if a fox climbed up what they are building, he would break down their stone wall. Listen, our God, for we are despised. Make their insults return on their own heads and let them be taken as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their guilt or let their sin be erased from your sight because they have angered the builders.' So we rebuilt the wall until the entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had the will to keep working. When Sanballat, Tobiah, and the Arabs, Ammonites, and Ashdodites heard that the repair to the walls of Jerusalem was progressing and that the gaps were being closed, they became furious." So I'm just going to pause right here. You always have someone who's going to go against the grain, who's going to oppose what you're doing. And especially when we choose to do something for God. Like I told y'all in the last video or the video before the last video, I think if you're watching the end of chapter 2, I explained that when I started YouTube, there were a lot of negative and nasty comments. Yes. You would think like, no, you're talking about God. How could they? It's almost like, how could they not? There's always going to be opposition. But it says the people had the will to keep working. We have to have the will to keep going. These people ignored what Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the other tribes were saying. They ignored them and they kept working. They kept going. All right. Verse 8 says, "They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and throw it into confusion. So we prayed to our God and stationed a guard because of them day and night. In Judah it was said, 'The strength of the laborer fails since there is so much rubble. We will never be able to rebuild the wall.' And our enemies said, 'They won't realize it until we're among them and can kill them and stop the work.' When the Jews who lived nearby arrived, they said to us time and again, 'Everywhere you turn, they attack us.' So I stationed people behind the lowest sections of the wall at the vulnerable areas. I stationed them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. After I made an inspection, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, 'Don't be afraid of them. Remember the great and awe-inspiring Lord and fight for your countrymen, your sons and your daughters, and your wives and your homes.' When our enemies heard that we knew their scheme and that God had frustrated it, every one of us returned to his own work on the wall. From that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half held spears, shields, bows, and armor. The officers supported all the people of Judah who were rebuilding the wall. The laborers who carried the loads worked with one hand and held a weapon with the other. Each of the builders had his sword strapped around his waist while he was building, and the trumpeter was beside me. Then I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, 'The work is enormous and spread out, and we are separated far from one another along the wall. Wherever you hear the trumpet sound, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us.' So we continued the work while half of the men were holding spears from daybreak until the stars came out. At that time I also said to the people, 'Let everyone and his servants spend the night inside Jerusalem so that they can stand guard by night and work by day.' And I, my brothers, my servants, and the men of the guard with me never took off our clothes. Each carried his weapon even when washing." Y'all, opposition presented itself, but they said, "We got a plan for y'all opposition. If it's a war you want, it's a war you gonna get." He said half of his men worked, half of his men held weapons. They were in the vulnerable areas. They had a trumpeter. Listen, Nehemiah had a setup, baby. He had it going on. He said, y'all not gonna get us, and our God will fight for us. He was very strong in his stance. He was very grounded. He said, we're going to get the job done. We might have to make a little changes. We might have to make a little alterations here and there, but we are going to get the job done. And this is what I love about Nehemiah. Very smart, very strategic, very innovative. This man is great. All right, let's get into a little bit of the background of chapter 4. It says, with people's progress came their rivals' resistance. Sanballat, along with the Ashdodites, attacked the workers by mocking the Israelites who worked on the task, calling them pathetic, plotting to attack the Israelites and create confusion, spreading rumors, and even planning to 86 them. Nehemiah knew that if his people were focused on their enemies instead of the project God had given them to do, nothing would be accomplished. With each new attack, Nehemiah prayed to the Lord for help. As Nehemiah did, you can persevere through troubling times when you refuse to take your focus off God. That's big. You can get through troubling times as long as you refuse to take your focus off of God. That's big. God was indeed fighting for the Israelites, whose courage was a testimony to their enemies about their faith in him. The people's faithful perseverance in the face of opposition is an encouragement for all the people of God not to grow weary in doing good.